I would like to introduce to all of you my dad, Bill Thompson, the webmaster and owner-operator of ionbooks.com. How long have you been doing interviews?
23 years.
Do you remember your first interview?
Wow. I've never been asked that before.
What?
I know one of my very first was Jackie Collins.
Over the 23 years that you've been doing interviews, there are many people that you've obviously interviewed multiple times.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Of the people that you've interviewed multiple times, have there ever been any that the more you interview them, the more you realize they just don't really have anything more interesting to say?
The answer to the question is yes. There are people who are professional writers who are remarkably vapid. With all due respect to them, I mean, they are in some cases best-selling writers, but they do indeed have maybe not less to say with each book, but they just keep saying the same thing over and over and over again.
Who is the most interesting interview? The one that was the most interesting that you just had no idea this person was going to be that good?
David Cassidy. David Cassidy is the son of the late actor Jack Cassidy. Jack Cassidy was a remarkable actor, died tragically in a house fire when David Cassidy was just a teenager, I believe. So here's a man who, when he was a young man, had been a teen idol. But once we got into the interview, he was very introspective, very aware of who he was, where his place in the world was, and very much aware of being actor Jack Cassidy's son, especially when I pointed out to him, I said, you know, you're about the age now, aren't you, that your dad was when he died. Yeah, it was a very powerful moment.
How about any people that you've interviewed that you're like, oh my god, I can't believe I finally got this person, and they're just, really?
Yeah, and I will name only one name, because it does happen from time to time that this man, he can dish it out, so I know he can take it. John Stossel. He's a journalist who pulls no punches. He goes where he dares not go. He asks the questions that he dare not ask. And I interviewed him, and it was like interviewing cold chicken noodle soup.
Oh.
I'm sure he's a nice guy. He's a very nice guy if you're watching this. Hi, John. But no. I'll tell you, one of the biggest crowds I've ever seen any place I've ever worked, because people indeed would see the names on my sheet every morning, and they'd see who's coming in. One of the biggest crowds that any author, can you guess who it might have been? No, it's before your time. Captain Kangaroo.
Who is the one author that in the 23 years of interviewing you have not yet gotten and would just die to get a chance to just talk to him or her for 5, 10, 15 minutes?
I could die a happy man if only Stephen King would return my call.
Now, you have interviewed some of his rivals, such as R.L. Stein.
Oh, many of them. I've interviewed some of his co-authors. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just he is, and he's not, I'm told, a difficult man. I mean, it's just he has layers of protectors, of course. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants a little time with him, so he's a little challenging to get, and I just haven't quite broken through the barriers yet.
Any celebrities that you're hoping would come out with a book that you'd be able to meet?
Anyone from Law and Order.
Hey, you've already met Munch.
That's true, Richard Belzer, who
Yes.
actually is very entertaining.
So one of the places that you had worked, you actually had kind of like a welcome board, you know, who was going to be coming for your interviews and everything. And one particular day, you had somebody come in that, you tell the story better than I do.
In the lobby, the secretary receptionist would put a message board saying, welcome so-and-so. And most days, you know, the authors I interview are names, but not like huge names. But an office across the hall from our studios. They would take a glance and say, oh, Tom Clancy's coming. Oh, okay. You know, oh, Patricia Cornwell's coming. Oh, okay. You know. One day, though, the message board said, welcome, Jamie Lee Curtis. It was the only time I've seen these guys leave their door open so that they could see across the hall. So as soon as she comes in, hi, how are you? I'm glad to meet you. I said, you know, the guys across the hall, they've been waiting for you all morning. She said, really? She turns around from me, looks at them, and they're like, and then she walks across the hall to them. And they're like, oh my gosh, she's coming. Oh my gosh, she's coming. What do we do? What do we do? She went over there, and I'm watching as she just walks over to her, and they're like, hi. And then she sits up on the desk and she raises her skirt up a little bit and they're like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Oh yeah, it was a moment. It was a Kodak moment.
All right, so you've obviously interviewed a lot of big name people. You know, you mentioned Tom Clancy, Patricia Cornwell, Jamie Lee Curtis. You know, Chuck Jones was one of my first ones that I went to. But so you're used to getting a lot of people asking you, oh, so who's coming in today? So have you ever accidentally maybe said something you shouldn't have?
I had a colleague who would ask me every morning, so Bill, who's coming in today? What he meant was, is it Jamie Lee Curtis? Should I run and get my autograph book, my camera? Should I call my wife, etc., etc.? So who I had coming in that day was, and I told him, I said, yeah, nobody big. Elevator rides up, you know, next floor, some people get out, we're still on. 2 or 3 other people on the elevator. Next floor, everybody gets out except him and me and a woman I don't know. And then we get up to our floor and we all get out, we all start walking down the hallway, we're all walking toward my office. And it's at that point that I realize the woman I don't know is the nobody big. I explained to her she was very gracious, she was very nice about it.
Yes.
And in fact, she wasn't like, and I explained to her, you know, the whole autograph book camera thing, and she understood she's not a big celebrity. Her husband, however, might have been had he written the book and been there. I don't know if I've ever even told you this part of the story.
No.
Her husband is Jerry Bruckheimer.
Speaking of, you know, people that you have met who have been married to very big names, you had an autograph of somebody who had just recently passed because his wife had come in for her book and decided to bring him along.
I think you are referring, if I remember correctly, to a photographer named Jill Kremitz. So I knew I had her on my schedule, obviously, she's on my schedule, so I go to the lobby, you know, to greet her, and walk out there, hey Jill, how are you? Oh, and then I realize she's sitting next to a guy, looks kind of familiar, and then I realized, oh, Jill Kremitz had brought her husband, Kurt Vonnegut. And so I didn't want to say, oh my gosh, I am dying to interview you. Oh, but your wife is the one I got to interview. Like, how can I get him back there too? And then she said the magic words. We're getting ready to go back to the studio. She says to him, she says, why don't you come on in with us? Yes!
And now you have the book of her photography with...
Yes. He not only autographed the page, because he's in her book. It's a book of photographs of authors at their desks. So obviously she got a picture of her husband at work at his desk, so he autographed that page for me and drew me his little caricature of himself.
So there was a question that actually kind of scared a lot of my friends, especially boyfriends, throughout the years, that you asked a certain author. And
I was interviewing the great, the legendary Wolfman Jack.
Everybody knows the Wolfman.
Wolfman had some hard times. I mean, in his life. He'd grown up in a rough neighborhood in New York. He'd had his share of drugs and violence and things like this. So I asked him, I said, Wolfman, why do you suppose, given all of it that you've been through, why aren't you dead?
I said, well, I guess the good Lord just ain't done with me yet.
He died that night. I have asked that question a couple of times since then. It's a fair question.
It is.
If you've had a rough life, why aren't you? I mean, by all right, I mean, if you've been shot or stabbed or put yourself into
Brian Welch, you got very close to asking him along.
Essentially, yeah. I said, why aren't you dead by now?
Right.
It's a fair question.
What is the strangest thing that an author has asked of you?
Wow. I suppose maybe the most unusual thing would be Mitch Albom. I arrived on time. He's not here yet. Not here yet. Finally he comes down about half an hour late, and he's flying. He says, I'm sorry, I gotta make it my next thing. I said, well, what about me? I'm here. He said, why don't you come on? I said, with you? He said, all right. So I did that interview in the back of a speeding limousine.
What do you feel is the strangest thing that anybody has asked an author?
Your mother.
Oh, jeez.
Your mother once asked Will Chamberlain to sign an old shoe, and Will Chamberlain just looked at it and said, "You want me to sign an old shoe?"
Well, it was definitely a pleasure. This is my first interview, and I look forward to your comments, and definitely check out his website, ionbooks.com.
EYE onbooks.com, and you can subscribe there via iTunes.
Yes.